Today, we're reacting to Denver's 10th loss of the season. We're talking about Paxton Lynch's opportunity. We're talking about Kirk Cousins' possible future in Denver. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle. It is time to drop some knowledge. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me, as always, Will Keys, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Will, did Santa Claus bring you everything that you had hoped for?
Well, I went downstairs and I was hoping to find a brand new franchise quarterback under the tree, but alas, he was not there. So
alas,
we'll wait until 2018 for that one.
Maybe it's a delayed gift. Like maybe it's going to happen. The gift won't actually reveal itself until Week 17 when Paxton Lynch starts. Yeah,
Week 17, free agency, the NFL draft. It's one of those things where your mom or dad gives you like a letter, like a symbol of something, like that's a greater gift. It might be that.
Well, we'll talk more about Lynch here in just a minute, but we got a lot to get to today. This is a show dedicated to diving deep on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos. And, of course, we need your help in the process because we can't grow without you. So take some time if you haven't done it. Go to iTunes, go to Stitcher, wherever you listen to the show, and make sure you leave a creative review and rate the show. Very important to us, growing and reaching new listeners. Also, follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Make sure you're also following Mile High Huddle on Twitter and Facebook. A lot of different things we do there via social media that you don't want to miss out on. And we're coming up on the season finale, and then we're going to go into what's going to be probably the most critical offseason for the Denver Broncos in the last decade. And we're going to be dropping knowledge several times a week. You're not going to want to miss a single episode, so make sure you're subscribing. And again, a lot to get to today, but before we do, we want to say thank you to our sponsor, Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. There's over 180,000 different titles to choose from, whether you're using your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Again, that's www.audibletrial.com/huddleup. And this is something for you regular listeners, longtime listeners, you know that we all use on the regular. Myself, I've already listened to it twice today, once in the car and once while I was doing some stuff in the kitchen, listening to a book. So, it's you don't have to be a big reader to enjoy and get a lot out of Audible. It allows you to get some of these books in that you don't always have time to sit down and turn those pages while you're doing other things. Also a phenomenal way to support the show. By patronizing our sponsors, you support the show. And for those of you who have done that, we appreciate you. If you haven't tried it yet, go get yourself that free book and 30-day free trial, audibletrial.com/huddleup. All right, so let's talk about Week 16. Christmas Eve, the Broncos took to our nation's capital and got lambasted by Kirk Cousins and the Washington Redskins to the tune of 27-11. We'll start off here, Will. Let's talk about our good friend Brock Osweiler. The Brock Lobster, he went, 22 of 38, 193 yards. He was sacked 4 times and picked off once while also losing a fumble. And it was interesting. I think the most memorable thing out of his performance didn't actually come on the gridiron. It was on the sideline, a bizarre scene in which Osweiler's marching up and down, screaming, I assume at his teammates, but nobody is paying him any mind. How do you interpret that?
I think people realize that it's game 16 and there's nothing on the line. And when there's nothing on the line, it's really hard to get worked up, even for professional athletes. So I don't know. I thought it was kind of funny in the moment. It obviously made the rounds on the internet. I don't think it says anything necessarily about Brock's leadership style. I think if this was a game where the Broncos were 9-5 and not 5-9, I think his words might have carried a little more gravitas to the guys on the sideline. But given that there's nothing to play for, it's so hard to get worked up. And I don't know. Brock's just kind of he's a great cheerleader, but I don't know. He's kind of falling on deaf ears right now.
And he's become such an easy target. I mean, he's like the meme creator. Like he can create.
He is a meme machine. Yeah,
a meme machine. Thank you. No time flat. You need a funny meme for your Facebook account, or you're trying to grow your Twitter following. Drop yourself a fresh Brock Osweiler meme. But no, I think part of the issue with this is you see him walking up and down the sideline screaming at his teammates who he's not really looking at them per se. Like he's not really addressing them with eye contact in the way, human communication. If someone's talking to you,
right,
usually they're looking at you. So that was a little different. So it's kind of hard to really know the full context. But to me, kind of what I get out of it as well is this is an offense that really hasn't played as a unit, as a complete unit, all season long. It's kind of felt like a group of an interchangeable 11 mercenaries that just go in, do their job to the best of their abilities, and go out. Like there's no cohesiveness. It doesn't feel like there's much, not just individual but collective accountability, and some of that can be laid at the feet of the coaches. But it just feels like an offense that is altogether disconnected from the events that are actually transpiring and the ramifications of what happens on the field. Osweiler walking up and down the sideline screaming at people. No one gives a crap. And I think you're right. Some of that has to do with the stakes and where the team's at this point. But I think it also speaks to a little bit bigger of a picture in terms of really what is lacking on this offense. And the Broncos going into 2018, that is something that they absolutely have to address.
Yeah, I think kind of to your point, it's hard to create a sort of culture of leadership when you don't know who your leader is necessarily every week. And the Broncos have been switching quarterbacks since they inserted Brock Osweiler, a few weeks ago for I can't remember what game it was, but when he took over for Simeon. And it's hard to, I don't know, because you're trying to look to one person to lead your offense. And when that guy changes every week, it's hard to build up some type of rapport or, respect or mutual respect or what have you. But it's not good to be – I think that kind of just shows it's not good to be switching quarterbacks all the time. And obviously that's
Definitely
not the plan, but that's just kind of how this season has gone. And that's, that's the result, I think.
That's going to be priority number one for this team heading into the offseason is finding – that next quarterback. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that subject later on in this episode. But suffice to say, as we get into 2018 and get closer to the beginning of the new league year, we're going to have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. We could go through, looking at this game in Washington, some of the stats. Does it freaking matter? The Broncos lost their 10th game of the year. Really, there's the one thing I do want to point out is that the team rushed for 159 yards on the road, averaging 5.5 per clip, and yet they got blown out. You look at C.J. Anderson leading the team, 88 yards. He got his garbage time touchdown on 16 carries, and this was coming off of an 158-yard output from the previous week, which is actually, if you combine the 2 weeks from week 15 to week 16, was C.J. Anderson's second best 2-week rushing total in his career. So, it's kind of bizarre. At the same time, you had questionable pass protection. The Redskins' defensive front was just having their way with the Broncos' offensive line.
Yeah.
And Brock Osweiler just was not handling the pressure well. But the flip side to that coin, and what's so frustrating is, again, we see the influence of Bill Musgrave and his, penchant for running the ball and playing that power offense. You get the right guy calling signals. You take care, move some of the pieces around on the offensive line, find another tackle. The Broncos could have something there, even with Bill Musgrave calling the plays in 2018.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what, obviously Ryan Kerrigan basically had his way with Garrett Bowles, and there's that one really notable play where there's a screenshot of Garrett Bowles basically doing a headstand
right,
5 yards away from the quarterback. And I don't know, it's tough for me to pin everything on one player, especially a rookie like Garrett Bowles. And he's done so well this season. I think that it's really hard to complain about him when he has a really tough game against a premier pass rusher in the NFC. Guy's made something like 3 Pro Bowls. But one thing that I really didn't like from the offense is that Brock Osweiler was kind of needlessly conservative. And I think what we liked about him in that Colts game was he really wasn't afraid to rip it. And it's like he came in with no expectations off the bench, like when Trevor Siemian played so well against the Raiders. It's almost as if, he didn't have any expectations. Brock Osweiler does the same against the Colts, rips the ball down the field. The guys like Cody Latimer, Jeff Hireman. And another thing that I didn't mention earlier, but we should note that, he was playing without Cody Latimer and Emmanuel Sanders, so that didn't make things easy.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really set this offense back is that they're throwing the ball to the running back just about every play. And these weren't necessarily like designed pass plays to the running backs or well-designed screen passes, but they're kind of just checkdowns that didn't go anywhere. Right. I think something like over 50% of the passes went to running backs, and he just wasn't looking downfield, wasn't willing to go downfield, or whatever it was. It just wasn't working, and Washington's linebackers were all over it, and I don't know if that was their game plan or what, but it just didn't work.
Well, a lot to unpack from what you just said there. And starting with Garrett Bowles, it's interesting because right now he is persona non grata in Denver media. If you turn on and listen to 104.3 The Fan, any of those fine analysts there, I mean, they talk about Garrett Bowles like he's trash, which I completely disagree with. He's not.
Yeah.
He still has discipline issues. He's still working out some of the kinks, but I think from an organizational point of view, the Broncos are happy with him, and they're happy with the fact that they invested a first-round pick in a kid who is considered to be old-ish, even for an offensive lineman. So Garrett Bowles, I'm not one of those guys that's buying into the hate. I know, obviously, he still has quite a bit to work on in his young career, but he'll get there. He'll get there. Secondly, you're right. I mean, the Broncos were missing two key receivers, and that Washington secondary, man, they just were not allowing Demaryius Thomas, Benny Fowler, and that combination of wideouts to create any separation, which was allowing 3- and 4-man rushes to get home. So you had that killer balance, I guess, of a secondary doing its job to a T and a front 7, or a front 4, I should say, really getting after it. So, and then you're right. I mean, I think it was 50%. Oh, I read that stat. I might be wrong on that. We'll have to check after the show. But
it was
anyway,
over, I think.
Yeah, on dump-off passes to running backs. I mean, Andy Janovich, for crying out loud, it was only 2 receptions, but he tied a freaking career high with 21 yards on 2 catches. So a lot to you're right, Brock Osweiler just being conservative. I think the pressure got to him early, and you could really see how that translated to his play.
Right.
Now, you look at the flip side to that coin, a guy in Kirk Cousins who goes, 19 of 37, 299 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then that interception in the red zone. So the Broncos held him to less than 300 yards, which, just for what it's worth, the Broncos remain the only team in the NFL to not allow us a 300-yard passer this season by the virtue of 1 single yard. But we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the show, but let's talk about Kirk Cousins, because he had himself a day, and it was a kind of audition for the Broncos, put on a show, and for all the Broncos fans pining for Cousins in 2018, my thing is you should pump the brakes a little bit. And it's not that I'm saying that pump the brakes because Cousins is no good, but rather last week, Adam Schefter of ESPN, NFL Insider, he poured some cold water on the notion of Cousins hitting the open market. He was on 104.3 The Fan's morning show last week. I forget which day. But he said that he doesn't think, from what he's hearing, that Redskins GM Bruce Allen is going to let Cousins go just for nothing, unrestricted. Basically that Washington is either going to franchise tag him or transition tag him and force teams to negotiate and give something up in order to acquire Kirk Cousins. So what that means, if you're the Broncos, not only will you have to find the cap space to pay Kirk Cousins, in all likelihood, you'll also have to give up a couple of first-round picks or a first-rounder and a second-rounder for the privilege. For me, that makes Kirk Cousins too rich for my blood, considering the state of the Broncos roster. How about you, though?
I agree. So, I don't know. It just never seemed like the Redskins would want to just let Kirk Cousins hit the open market, because obviously, that does no good for them. And the only leverage really that NFL franchises have in these situations are the tags, and they franchise tagged him, I think, twice right now.
Correct.
So they could place the transitional tag on him, which would mean that the Broncos or any other team would have to give up a couple picks and then pay him whatever his market value would be, which would be probably at this point, Jimmy Garoppolo's might skew this a little bit, and he might wait until Cousins gets paid, but it's probably going to be higher than the Derek Carr contract.
I would guess
probably about
the floor's got to be $27 million.
Yeah, I was thinking somewhere from 28 to 30, and just thinking about like the transitional tag will kind of, I think, drop it down a little bit. But I was talking about this with my family the other day. It's like, what if Kirk Cousins, who is a top 10 quarterback, I think we can all agree on that, where he places in the top 10 is kind of up for debate, but we'll say for the sake of argument, he's a top 10 guy. When was the last time a top 10 quarterback, and we'll throw Peyton Manning out because he's a special case, hit the open market?
Right. Well, to that point, really quick, this brings up something we touched on a few episodes back, and I wrote about at milehighhuddle.com, which is there such thing as a free agent franchise quarterback? Right. Do free agents, or I should say, do franchise quarterbacks, that caliber of player, truly ever hit the open market? And Kirk Cousins, I'm not saying he isn't, but he might actually be the first franchise caliber quarterback.
I agree.
That doesn't come with any caveats, doesn't come with 4 neck surgeries or anything like that, to hit the open market. Because look at Drew Brees, for example. He became a franchise guy after the fact, right? So like you almost have to throw that out the window, because what I'm saying is franchise quarterbacks who are established franchise guys like Cousins has done for himself in Washington, hitting that open market.
Right. And obviously the Brees year, there was a little bit of competition with guys like Dante Culpepper, and obviously Miami swung and missed with that one. But this year you assumed that there was going to be a little competition for Cousins too, that would take a little bit of heat off of the NFL teams that would actually have to, offer up some bids for him. But Jimmy Garoppolo's looks like he's, going to stay in San Francisco long term, assuming that they pony up and pay him what should be close to Kirk Cousins' money.
And they will. They have a ton of cap space.
Yeah. That's the advantage of not really having any other good players. But Kirk Cousins, he's the best quarterback to ever hit the free agent market unfettered, assuming that he does, because we might be underselling his value because we've never seen it happen. And when you get a bunch of teams pining for that franchise quarterback, and you see him without any there's no restrictions based on draft order or anything like that. It's just money. It's just a bidding war.
Right.
And I don't think that's ever happened. It's the most important position in football with a top 10 guy at that position, and there's so few of those guys to be had that hitting it, unrestricted, it's like nothing we've ever seen.
Well, but now we're being faced with the increasing reality that it's not going to be unrestricted. There will be strings attached for teams who want to, dive head first into the Kirk Cousins sweepstakes.
But the thing is I don't think Kirk Cousins, from everything that I've heard, I don't think he wants to stay in Washington, and his leverage could be that he just doesn't play, and he just holds out.
That could very well be, and the fact is teams can franchise tag a player and then rescind it. We saw Carolina do it with Josh Norman following Super Bowl 50. So they could play that game in the similar kind of way that Dallas and Tony Romo had a little bit of a standoff right before he just said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to retire and go call games with Jim Nantz, where they were kind of trying to strong-arm the situation. In this case, just to kind of play out the scenario, Bruce Allen and the Redskins could, let's just say the franchise tag. Kirk Cousins, once again, third year in a row, which would mean it would come with a $35 million price tag.
And Washington, I don't think Washington would want to pay that either, because that's an absurd amount of money to play any one player, even though he's a great quarterback.
Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm inclined to agree with you that they probably don't have the means, at least with the way their cap is currently constructed, to they'd have to make some changes. But let's just, for the sake of argument, they control him through free agency. Now he's basically under their control. Teams can negotiate with them for his rights via trade. And let's say no one's willing to pony up the picks or whatever Washington's asking for, and the money gets spent, that money dries up in free agency quickly. It goes elsewhere. Then Kirk Cousins, let's say the Redskins go, well, you know what, we tried, didn't work out. All right, we're going to go ahead and just rescind this tag. You're on your own. Now the money's dried up. And so these are the scenarios that could take place with Kirk Cousins. But again, for me, thinking about it through the lens of the Denver Broncos, let's just say he does not hit the open market, but the Redskins are very aggressively putting him on the trading block. What would you, let's put it this way, Will, what would you realistically, if you were John Elway, be willing to give up in order to get the privilege of offering Kirk Cousins a 5-year deal?
So I think you have to have a little bit of context. So this is going off of memory, but how much did the 49ers give up for Garoppolo? What was it, 2 second-rounders?
Actually, it was a single second-rounder. Right.
So and ironically, the better Garoppolo plays, the lower or the higher, lower. I always get confused with that. Lower that second-round pick would be for the Patriots once they get it. But I think the consensus now that they see Garoppolo play and they see that the impact that a good quarterback can have on a team, which San Francisco obviously hasn't had in a while, is a second rounder was highway robbery for the 49ers to only give that up for the Patriots.
Right.
So I think that'll be in the back of everyone's mind if the Kirk Cousins saga comes down to a trade. So I would think it'd have to be obviously a first rounder involved. You could maybe talk about a player might make sense just in terms of freeing up cap space. So if you want to involve a player, I don't know who that would be. It obviously depends on the team.
You have to have value. I mean, C.J. Anderson still has some value. You could even look at moving a guy like Aqib Talib or Bradley Roby or Shane Ray.
Talib, Shane Ray, Emmanuel Sanders maybe. These are all possibilities, so you might have to get creative, but I would think you'd have to give up a first-round pick, and obviously the Broncos have the 7th pick, I think, right now in the first round.
Well, after the week's games went by, they're now currently sitting at 6.
Oh, 6. Okay, so it gets better and better.
Indeed.
So it gets more valuable. So a 6th-round pick, obviously, as opposed to, say it was like a team like the Jaguars, who you assume we're going to be picking in the 25 to 30, I don't want to say 32 yet range, but
right.
Assuming that they're going to get rid of their quarterback, their first-round pick is a lot less valuable. The Broncos' first-round pick holds a lot more water, obviously, because it's 6 right now. So let's say you gave up. Let's do a little ESPN trade machine between you and me. I'm the Broncos. You're the Redskins. You're Dan Snyder.
All right.
Yeah. So I'm going to offer you the 6th overall pick, the 3rd round pick, which is not a math guy, but I'm going to say that's 70th overall. That's completely false, actually, now that I do the math. No, it is 70th. Yeah, 32 plus 32. There we go, 70.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you Emmanuel Sanders. You have to take on his contract. What do you say for Kirk Cousins?
Well, depends on what other people are offering me. If that's the best offer I could get,
it's the best offer.
If that's the best offer, I mean, I'm taking it. I think at the very least, the Broncos will have to be willing to give up their first-round top 10 pick along with a let's say a second or third-round pick like next year. So if you're the Redskins, Denver's a prime target for that trade because now you're looking for a quarterback. And your best odds of getting that quarterback is going to be in the top 10. Now, 6, if let's say the Broncos finish
it's
at 6.
It's a little trickier at 6th.
It's still a little tricky, but suddenly you're within striking distance, just as the Broncos would be if they hold on to that pick to wheel and deal and move up, because now you have 2 first-round picks, right? To move up and get a guy like Josh Rosen or whichever quarterback you've got your heart set on. Realistically, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen at the Combine. We don't know what – I mean, things get pretty crazy the closer it gets to the draft, but a guy like Baker Mayfield coming off one of the most phenomenal quarterback seasons in the history of NCAA football and a Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, who knows? He might end up being right there as 1, 2, 3. If I don't think the USC kid has actually said he's not declaring yet, has he?
No, not as of this podcast.
Right. So then you got Josh Rosen too, and those are the top 3 in my mind: Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield. Now, my sentimental favorite of those 3 is Mayfield. But if you're at 6, you have a shot at probably one of those guys. So if you're the Redskins, that's a feasible,
most likely Mayfield, yeah.
Probably Mayfield, probably. But now you got 2 first-round picks and additional ammunition with which to deal if you wanted to move up. So I don't know. If that's the best-case scenario, and I just tagged Kirk Cousins, and that's my best offer, I'm taking it. So the Broncos unleash their what would be their highest first-round pick since 2011, but still also probably their highest first-round pick in the last 25 years, aside from 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, they're getting rid of Emmanuel Sanders' contract, which is great. Getting rid of that cancerous kind of attitude he has. I shouldn't say cancerous, but it's an attitude and a type of body language that can become.
It doesn't jive with a losing season. We'll say that.
And you're getting rid of a third-round pick, which the caliber could turn into a Justin Simmons type of player, or the flip side could be Brendan Langley and be absolutely nothing, or Jeff Hireman, or Michael Schofield, all of which were third-round picks. So, I don't know. It'll be really interesting. Well, we should probably move on, but it'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out the closer we get and exactly what Washington does. I mean, they have the right, after developing this guy for the last 6 seasons, to try and get something out of him before he departs their fair city.
They sure do.
So let's, for now, though, those are future issues. And again, we'll dissect more of that in a lot more depth the closer we get to that time of year and the more information that becomes available. But for now, let's go back and focus on the quarterback that has been pegged to start this week for the Denver Broncos, Paxton Lynch. After serving as Osweiler's backup last week, of course, it comes as no surprise to hear head coach Vance Joseph announce that the former first-rounder is going to start in the season finale against the Chiefs. And you know what? There's a good chance that it's going to be head-to-head with Kansas City's rookie number 1 pick, Patrick Mahomes. So it'll be interesting to see if that's indeed the direction Andy Reid decides to go. Now, we'll break this down, but first, I want you to hear, everyone listening, this exchange that took place on Tuesday at Dove Valley. Now, mostly, just so you know who you're hearing, mostly it's DMACC, Darren McKee of 104.3 The Fan, the biggest show in Denver, which is The Drive. I think it's from 3 to 6 on weekdays. Most of you, I'm sure, know exactly who I'm talking about, but for those who don't, he's the guy asking some of the little bit more confrontational style questions, and you're going to hear in this exchange directed at Vance Joseph. So listen to this line of questioning and how Joseph answered them. Here we go.
What's your quarterback situation for this game?
The plan is to play Paxton. That was kind of the plan last week, if he was healthy enough to play. So this week, that's the plan, to play Paxton.
Is the plan to start Brock and play Paxton?
No, the plan is to start Paxton. Absolutely, this week.
I'm just making sure. Is there some question in your mind about his health?
About Paxton?
Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, he wasn't quite ready last week, so hopefully he's ready to go this week. So that's the plan, to start Paxton this week.
Why is the plan to start Paxton?
Well, we want to see him play. Obviously, that's been the goal the last couple of weeks, and we haven't, that hadn't happened. So we want to see him play live bullets in a football game.
Is that more important than winning the game?
Is that more important? I would say not. But, our first goal is to win a football game, obviously. But, again, with it being a quarterback issue going into the offseason, we want to see him play to see what his player is, and obviously winning the game is always our first priority. So, not saying if he's playing we can't win. So, I mean, he's going to be our quarterback. We expect to win.
Would you say you need to show confidence in the ankle because he was deemed healthy?
Right.
Secondly, is it perhaps a little misleading if the Chiefs play all their twos, or does that matter?
No, we don't care about the Chiefs as far as who they play. It's more about our football team winning the football game on Sunday and having a chance to see our young quarterback play.
It's brutal. It's scathing. I could imagine just being a fly on the wall, being in that room, how uncomfortable some of those other journalists were, because DMACC is a guy known for asking the tough questions. I mean, his most famous question, of course, coming to Roger Goodell a few years ago, and that's topic for another time. But for those in the Denver market who don't like DMACC, let me just say that I respect the hell out of this guy. He knows his stuff. He's not afraid to ask the tough questions, and I enjoy his analysis. I think he's got a lot to offer. But, Will, let me ask you. You heard that. Do you think the decision to start Paxton Lynch this week comes from Vance Joseph and the coaching staff, or do you think it comes from on high from John Elway?
Well, given that Vance Joseph doesn't have a lot of job security right now, and that's probably something we'll talk about later, I think it probably comes from on high, just because it seems like more of a long-term franchise move than, something to save your job at this point in Week 17, which I don't know is even possible now, but it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And obviously you would have liked to see, 3 games out of Paxton Lynch to end the season. We were originally planning on 6 from that Raiders game on, but the injury kind of messed things up.
Well, and the funny thing about that injury, just real quick, is I've been told that he was actually, even that day in Oakland when he pulled up lame, went on the sideline, the trainers were actually telling him, go back into the game.
Really?
And he refused. He didn't want to go back in. And then you saw him on the sideline crying and, all the tears and everything, and in goes Simeon, who lights it up. The Broncos still fall short, but think about that. That's your first-round pick, the guy that's supposed to go out there and be alpha dog, and he's not only unwilling to go back out there, but then he's crying on the sideline. That's what the Broncos have right now.
It was a bit of a strange look. It looked like Tim Tebow at the end of his collegiate career. I think losing in the SEC championship game, crying on the sideline. It was kind of shades of that. But it wasn't a good look. It kind of told you, I don't want to say all you need to know about Paxton Lynch, that game, where you have like flashes of a couple really nice passes, and then disaster, and then an injury, and then sitting on the sideline is kind of a microcosm of the Paxton Lynch experience in Denver for the last 2 years. But you do want to give him another chance, and you want to give him – I know – You'd like to evaluate your quarterbacks more than a couple of starts and a couple of incomplete starts at that in 1 year to kind of get a read of where you're at. And obviously the whole situation's kind of backed up because you'd like to see – you'd think that your quarterback, your first-round quarterback, would have earned a starting job in year 2. So that's obviously the biggest strike against him by now.
But here's my thing on that note.
Sure.
With the – issue the Broncos are facing going into 2018, the quarterback issue, and obviously this is going to be something they're going to work all hours of the night to fix, the quarterback position. Let's say Paxton Lynch goes out there in Week 17 and goes over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Is that really going to change after everything we know about Paxton Lynch up to this point? Is that really going to change Denver's approach in the offseason to finding an answer at the position? Is that really going to be the answer? Let's just say in the best case scenario, he goes out there and lights it up.
Right.
Does it change their situation?
I think it could keep him on the roster. I don't know if it makes him the starting quarterback heading into 2018, but I think it keeps him around. I don't know if there's anything that could make him the unquestioned starter going into 2018, but it could give him a chance to, be in a quarterback battle again. And obviously his chances of winning that are kind of dependent on who's on the other side of that, be it a draft pick or an established guy or, whomever.
Yeah. And I say that, I ask that question more as in a rhetorical sense to play devil's advocate because I do think the Broncos need to play him. Going into this offseason, they need every last ounce of information on the guy they invested a first-round pick in 2 years ago that they can get. So it's the correct decision. Brock Osweiler is, 0-4 now in games that he has started. He doesn't get credit for that win in Indy, of course, because Trevor Siemian started. So Brock Osweiler, we'll see what the future holds for him. But Paxton Lynch, you're up. Let's see what you can do in a home game. This time you're going to be playing at home, and you're going to be playing against a better-than-average team and your division champion, Kansas City Chiefs. Now, to piggyback off of the Lynch news, we have a new report that kind of put Vance Joseph's failures as a first-year head coach into a more, I think, glaring perspective. Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk postulates that Joseph is still very much on the hot seat. He points out, Florio, that by future of a garbage time touchdown, the Broncos narrowly avoided their fifth blowout loss of 20 points or more in Washington. In fact, just to put this in perspective for you listeners, the lowly Cleveland Browns, who sit at 0-15, guess what? They've only lost one game by 20 points or more. Denver has 4 such losses. And the big issue that Florio points to, which we know was sticking in John Elway's craw during the 8-game losing streak, is not being competitive, not fielding a competitive team. See, it's one thing to lose, but it is quite another to get blown out disproportionately throughout the season, and that happened again in D.C. at the hands of Kirk Cousins. So let me put it to you this way, Will. I know we had the Ian Rappaport report following the win over the Jets that the Broncos are really hoping this works out with Vance Joseph. losing in ugly fashion to the Redskins, which gave Denver double-digit losses for the season, does that change anything in your mind? And then to compound that with Paxton Lynch starting, the odds tell us Denver's probably going to lose the finale, which put them at a 5-11 finish. Do John Elway and Joe Ellis retain Vance Joseph?
I don't think it has to do so much with losing as the fashion that these losses are coming in, and they're coming in spectacular fashion for the most part. The Broncos haven't really lost too many close games, but their failures have been pretty spectacular when they do happen, and obviously over that 8-game losing streak. But it's hard to keep a guy who finishes out his first season with a couple of blowouts. It's just, we talked about how big of a feather in Vance Joseph's cap it would be to finish out the last 4 games with 4 victories. Mm-hmm. And now it'd be different if Denver, lost the Washington game by, say, a possession or a last-minute field goal or something like that. John Elway, I think, can live with that.
Right.
That's something to build off of. He's a competitive guy, obviously. He just wants to be competitive, I think, more than – obviously he wants to win, but I think number one for him is being competitive, and to see a team that's just not competitive, not responding to Brock Osweiler on the sidelines, stuff like that, right, reflects really poorly on Vance Joseph, and I don't think that's something that John Elway wants to put his stamp on necessarily. Mm-hmm. So I think as a team – if this was something like maybe like a reverse Raiders situation in 2016 where they're winning a bunch of games by really small margins, if the Broncos had lost a bunch of games by small margins,
right,
I think even if their record is 5-11, Vance Joseph keeps his job, because with those types of losses, there's a statistical, I guess whatever the opposite of a regression would be, maybe an aggression to the mean. Progression, there that's the word, aggression to the mean. Getting all Moneyball, but there's, the odds say that those types of games are going to even out for you. The odds don't say that blowouts are going to even out for you. It's not like the Broncos, if they lose by 4 games by 20 points, doesn't mean they're going to win 4 games by 20 points in 2018. That's not how it works.
Right. So
I think it's the margin of victory, and it's the morale and everything that losing big does to you, and it's just such a it puts a damper on the whole franchise, and it's hard to keep the architect of that type of losing season around for another year.
As you say, I mean the teams for Vance Joseph keeps standing at the podium and talking about all this great leadership that the Broncos have, but obviously it's not working. It's not having the type of lifting effect and galvanizing effect that it needs to have in football. And that goes back to Vance Joseph too, as you say, how it reflects on him. You got players who are leaders, but what the coaches are saying are obviously not hitting home with these players, whether it's technique, whether it's mindset, whether it's playbook, whatever. I mean, look at what happened with Isaiah McKenzie, a guy that Vance Joseph has given chance after chance after chance after. I mean, obviously those two have some kind of a connection. Like, I think behind closed doors, those guys have had meetings together, and he's probably taken him under his wing as kind of a little brother project guy. They have some kind of a bond that keeps compelling Joseph to give him chance after chance. But again, Joseph himself said that McKenzie was reminded before that play that the ball's going outside for a specific reason so you can get out of bounds. And he cuts back inside and kills Denver's opportunity to put some points on the board before halftime and get a little bit of momentum. Now, we know in the grand scheme of the game, the way it played out, that those 3 points wouldn't have mattered. But had they gotten those 3 points at the end of the second half, gotten a little bit of momentum, stuck their foot in the ground a little bit, who knows how that second half could have played out. But again, this is going off a little bit. It comes back to Vance Joseph that his message is falling on deaf ears, and then you compound that and compare that with the way the Broncos have lost so many games this year, the 8-game losing streak. I mean, there's just so much negative history now built into what this season has been for the Broncos. Like, on one hand, I understand you don't want to fire a first-year head coach, but he's really, with the exception of winning 2 games late in the year against 2 subpar teams, he has shown, Vance Joseph, very little in the way of any encouragement to this front office and to the president of the team that he can turn the ship around.
Right. You talk about cutting your losses with a guy like Paxton Lynch. I'd say that probably also applies to head coaches. You don't want to set your organization back a year just to hold on to a guy who you know isn't going to be good, just to say, well, at least we didn't fire him after year one.
Right.
Because if you know he's bad, and I think John Elway would have a more complete perspective on that than us, looking in from the outside would have.
Sure.
But if your gut tells you this guy, I made a mistake and I should just drop it rather than keep up the facade another year and incur another losing season just in the interest of team pride, let him go. You're not going to do him any favors by keeping him around for another year.
I think a lot of what will inform, part of the equation that will inform Denver's decision with Vance Joseph is candidates, viable candidates that they could replace him with.
Absolutely.
So it all depends on how they view some of the guys out there that are considered to be head coaching candidates. And we should also point out that the NFL is poised to have a record number of head coaching vacancies in 2018. That as a possibility. Now, that's not a for sure thing yet, but I've heard it postulated. I read a piece on it. I can't remember who it was I read that from. But long story short, there's going to be a lot of jobs to go around, a lot of coaches filling these jobs from both the professional and the college ranks. So the Broncos, they're going to be in, if they do fire Joseph, they got to have a viable candidate that they not only want and feel like can be the guy, but they got to have in their minds a realistic chance of recruiting him and hiring him for the job. That guy's got to want to come to Denver. And we've talked about also the negative aspects of firing a guy like Vance Joseph. Yep. Who would be your third coach in, however many years, 4, 5, 6 years. 6 years, I guess it would be. Being a coach killer, being as a head coach or a coach, prospectively, in all likelihood, being a guy going into his first opportunity to be a head coach. You want to go to Denver where those expectations and now this litany of coaches who haven't worked out. And so there are a lot of moving pieces and parts to this equation and how it applies to Vance Joseph. But I think suffice to say, the one thing I will concur with Mike Florio is if the Broncos go into Week 17 in their home finale on a doomed season and crap the bed and get blown out, I don't think the Broncos are bringing Vance Joseph back.
I agree with you there. It's just if it's a close loss or, obviously a victory, which I think is possible given that Kansas City doesn't have anything to play for and it's a, season finale at home. I don't want to say that they can't win, but I think another 20-point loss or, a garbage time touchdown that makes it look a little closer in the box score, I think that's the nail in Vance Joseph's coffin.
Amen. Well, we'll see how it shakes out. Let's move on and talk about another little piece of news that broke on Tuesday. As the Broncos reconvened at Dove Valley, Nicky Jhabvala of the Denver Post managed to corner Jamaal Charles and got some very interesting remarks from him. Now, let's put it in context. Charles was a healthy scratch in Washington as the rookie D'Angelo Henderson was able to finally dress. So with one game to go, Charles now has appeared in 14 games for the Broncos with 0 starts. He's got a total of 425 yards from scrimmage on the season and a single touchdown with no real hope of improving those stats in the final game of the year. Now the Broncos, of course, they're still hell-bent, as we see from the Paxton Lynch start, on playing the young'uns, right? They want to see some of these younger guys, and you saw it even in Washington, guys like DeMonte Thomas playing and Marcus Rios, the undrafted rookie corner as well. I mean, the Broncos are utilizing some of these younger guys to see what they've got in them, even the guys they didn't draft but have acquired. So Charles, they're not using him, and the season's almost over, while the flip side is a playoff team out there could put a guy like Jamaal Charles to some great use, but the Broncos would have to release him, of course. Here's what Charles said to the Denver Post about the prospect of Denver releasing him. I'll read the quote. Quote, "I ain't playing. Might as well. No reason for me to just sit around and look at people play. It is what it is. I'm still going to be supportive of everyone on the team no matter what. I mean, they got my rights right now." Closed quote. And then one more. Quote, "I thought we were all going to get a chance to share the ball," Charles said. "I never got a chance to be in the first 15 plays, and it sucks. How the other running backs, I look around and see the Patriots share the running backs in New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? I just never got an opportunity." Closed quote. touche. I mean, it sounds like Charles was promised some things before the season started in terms of the democratization. I don't know if I said that right, of the touches and how
Close
the touches were going to be distributed amongst him, C.J. Anderson, and Devontae Booker that have not come to fruition. He is not a happy camper. Now, we understand why that would be. I mean, this is one of the all-time great running backs. This is a fiery competitor, and I think it's fair to say he's shown in his very few opportunities this year that he still has some juice left in that tank. But should the Broncos release him? I mean, in a perfect world, I would say just do it. Go ahead. But the Broncos can't do it. It would set an embarrassing precedent, being a team who has no postseason future that just cuts a tenured veteran just so they can hopefully catch on elsewhere. I mean, that's just an embarrassing notion, and there's no way in hell John Elway will do that. And I think for his remarks, Jamaal Charles might end up not dressing in the season finale as well.
I don't necessarily agree. I mean, I agree in that I don't think it'll happen, but I don't know that it's a super embarrassing thing. Like just today, the Steelers cut James Harrison, and he signed with a team that's like fairly likely to meet the Steelers in the playoffs and the New England Patriots.
Both have postseason destinies, though.
Right. But the Broncos, I think it would be a favor, I guess, to Jamaal Charles in the grand scheme of things. And I would like to see Jamaal Charles catch on with a playoff team, if at all possible. I think he'd make a lot of sense on a team like Seattle or possibly Minnesota. I'm just putting him on all these NFC teams just because I don't want to see him on like the Patriots or
Chiefs. Well, he wouldn't go back to Chiefs, but
yeah, I think that bridge has been thoroughly torched at this point.
Definitely.
But I like the guy, and I understand his frustration completely. And I think the Broncos, for a long time, have kind of tried to fit a square peg in a round hole as far as the running back situation goes, because I think in this age in the NFL, you really have to cycle backs, and the Broncos keep trying to insist that C.J. Anderson is a feature back, and to some extent he can be, but it's not in the best interest of your team to do that, and it's better, like the Patriots have shown, and teams like the Saints, to use a more recent example, to have a diverse group of running backs that all do different things, that you bring in from play to play to play. You don't give them a drive, you give them a play, and you work them to their strengths. And I don't think the Broncos have done a very good job of playing to their running back strengths. And they've just mismanaged the whole situation. They had D'Angelo Henderson active for the first time yesterday, and he doesn't touch the ball till the fourth quarter, and he or the third quarter, I think.
He
catches a pass. Right? Yeah, he catches a 4-yard pass and goes out of bounds. One of the, I think, 2,000 backs to catch a pass from Brock Osweiler yesterday. But I don't understand. You're deactivating Jamaal Charles so you can activate a rookie running back that everyone was excited about from the preseason on, just to give him one snap on offense. It really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well,
I understand his frustration completely.
To your point, I mean, if you're going to do it, you do it because you're doing a future Hall of Fame caliber player a solid, right? You're saying, look, we it didn't work out here, but we're going to cut you loose, and you've never won a Super Bowl, and maybe you can catch on somewhere and go out on top type thing. But again, the issue for me, if just looking at it objectively, is John Elway that type of guy? And I just don't think he is. And
there are no true favors in the NFL, I don't think.
Right, and more to your point too about the playing time and the way guys have gone up and down on the roster, who dresses, who doesn't. Again, it doesn't make sense, and it goes back to coaching and those type of decisions personnel-wise that lead into who are going to be the scratches on game day, right? Because you got 53 guys, only 46 can suit up, which is a stupid rule, by the way. But only 46 can suit up. D'Angelo Henderson proved in the preseason to be an absolutely electric player. Now, there's no guarantee that would translate to the regular season, where the war of attrition increases and goes up a few notches, and now you're playing against only first-string competition. But still, he was a clear difference maker in the preseason, and yet with all of Denver's offensive struggles, it never occurred to that coaching staff to say, you know what, let's dress him in Week 7 or Week 8 and see what he can do. So these are the type of issues that have plagued Vance Joseph and this staff, and he's going to have to answer to him at the end of the season, and the closer we get to the end, the more and more likely it seems that he's probably not going to be around.
I agree. Yeah, it's not a good look to have these kind of things come out in the media at the end of the season. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's lost the locker room, and I don't even know what losing the locker room really means at this point of the season, just because everyone who's losing is accused of losing the locker room as well. But I don't know. It doesn't reflect well on him as a head coach, and it probably doesn't bode well for him in this city.
I think what it really means is your players have stopped fighting for you. Your players have tuned you out, and they're no longer really fighting for you. Now, I don't think there's any way to say if that's happened for the Broncos. Like, there's no way for us to know yet unless players were actually speaking in that way, specifically about Joseph as a leader in the media and leaking things in that sense. But we're running out of time, so let's real quick jump to the Mile High mailbag. We are your Broncos priests. We're here to offer absolution, some answers to your burning Broncos questions. And the first one comes to speak specifically to what we just piggybacked from. At Zeb211. His question, Will, what's the honest, actual feeling from inside the locker room? Players giving up on Joseph? Vance was honest about the QBs for once, saying we have no leadership all year. Any other truths out there? Well, first of all, neither Will or myself were in the locker room. Okay,
you know of.
Yeah, right. We cover the team remotely, so we can't tell you from a first-hand experience exactly what the vibe is in that locker room. But my instinct and things I've heard and been told, I don't think, going back to what we were just talking about, I don't think this is necessarily a locker room who has given up on Vance Joseph. I do think these players, and we've heard them talk about it in the media, they do like Vance Joseph. Now, whether that translates to the type of passion to play for your coach and give it all on game day and execute and take the coaching and take the instruction and everything that comes from, coaches who are respected, who actually produce in this league, and how that trickles down to their players. I don't know if that the same can be said for Vance Joseph, but I do know at least this team likes his players speak positively about him in the media. Now, about the quarterbacks, for once saying that we have no leadership all year, what he's referring to here, Zeb, is that Vance Joseph on Tuesday, basically when he was actually asked about Brock Osweiler running up and down the sideline, yelling and screaming, and no one seemingly paying attention to him, he took that opportunity to basically say that Brock Osweiler has brought a type of leadership to this team that frankly has been absent all year, which many perceive to be a kind of underhanded shot at Trevor Siemian. And it very well may have, but I think if it was subconscious. I don't think he was meaningfully trying to take a shot at Trevor Siemian. But, right. Will, that's the question is, we've already addressed the locker room thing. Do you believe what Zeb is saying here, that the Broncos from the quarterback position under Trevor Siemian, do you think they were lacking that type of leadership, that kind of fire from, like we saw in a sense from Brock Osweiler over his 4.5 games he's appeared in?
There's not one way to be a leader, and I think they can both be leaders in their own ways, and I think they're both perfectly viable ways. There's guys who are more rah-rah leaders, and that's obviously Brock Osweiler, and some can perceive that as phony or false, especially when you're losing that. It's hard to, carry the same weight that it would when you're winning. You don't get that fire, obviously, in a 5-9 season. And there's guys like Trevor Siemian who ideally are trying to lead by example. They're not, big talkers. And obviously Trevor Siemian's not that guy, and he never has been. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to be like that. He's more of in terms of like leadership style, obviously not comparing them as quarterbacks, but his leadership style is closer to someone like Joe Montana than a quarterback like Cam Newton who gets his guys fired up.
There's guys right now like banging their heads against the wall, Siemian getting compared to Joe Montana, but go on.
Yeah, I'm just talking about in leadership, folks, so, or at least in terms of like style or approach, I guess would be the best word for it.
Right. And
more of a silent leader.
That's where Will and I, Trevor Siemian is one of our points of demarcation, as it were. Trevor Siemian, to me, now, going back to Zeb's question, I do think, and it's not that Siemian does not offer leadership, he does. I agree with you in that his brand of leadership is a different style than what you see from an animated type of guy like Brock Osweiler. My issue is it's not that he doesn't have leadership, it's that his type of leadership is not the type that you need from the quarterback position. So that's been my biggest problem with Trevor Siemian, is just the way he leads doesn't seem to be the type, the way that galvanizes his guys in the same type of sense that you see fiery, more fiery guys like your Kirk Cousins. You like that? Getting his troops riled up. That's all. But one more here, and we'll get out of here. For Mile High Maniac on Twitter, why does McKenzie keep getting these opportunities, which he screws up, but Henderson gets nothing, or Walker, or Langley? Rios playing over a third-rounder? Will, you take this one.
Well, it is strange that we keep pointing to McKenzie while D'Angelo Henderson gets one target, and basically that's his whole season. Guys like Walker and Langley really haven't performed, and to be honest, Rios has played much better than Langley, and I think he showed it yesterday. He had a really nice pass deflection. But the reason specifically for Isaiah McKenzie getting that opportunity yesterday was because Cody Latimer and Emmanuel Sanders were out, and I think if Sanders and Latimer were playing, Isaiah McKenzie ideally doesn't see the field yesterday, and that's really the only reason. Is you don't want to just sign a guy just to possibly they could have brought up a guy like River Craycraft off the practice squad, but at this point, you might as well give your 5th round pick a shot on offense, because you got to remember they're giving him a shot on offense, not another shot to return punts, and you assume that like a batter in baseball who. The confidence, you make an error in the field, and hopefully that doesn't lead to a strikeout when you go up to bat. You hope that, McKenzie muffing a punt doesn't mean a mental error at wide receiver. Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately, that was the case. So, the big reason for it was Latimer and Sanders, but, that's really the only reason.
Rios did have a phenomenal PBU on that deep shot down the right sideline that he just closed so quickly to break up.
That was a nice one.
He saved a touchdown there. So hats off to him, the rookie, undrafted rookie out of UCLA. But, with regard to Isaiah McKenzie, it's been a rough rookie season for him. Hopefully he learns from some of the trial by fire he's experienced this year. But, the bright side is you got Carlos Henderson, who's going to be healthy next year, whom the Broncos spent their original 3rd-round pick on, who injured his thumb in the preseason and had to go on IR. So he was a guy who guys like Nick Kendall, Carl Dummler, Eric Trickle, they were extremely high on Carlos Henderson being a Steve Smith caliber of wideout in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see if he can help elevate that wide receiver position in 2018. But you know what? That's all the time we have for today. You can find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKeys6 and myself at Chad and Jensen. Tweet us your questions. We're always going to try to address your concerns on the show as often as we can. Look for Nick and Carl's final Scout's Eye preview of the year by hopefully tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning, I should say, if not Thursday. But also, look for this. With bowl season upon us, Nick and Carl are also brewing up some episodes that are going to spotlight which NFL draft prospects to pay attention to during bowl season. So make sure you're subscribing, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.